Hey gang, Scott Davenport here. Welcome to In Post. Thanks for joining me today. Today's video I'm calling The Story in the Shadows, and why? It's because I started just tinkering around with this very dark image that I took, before the sun came up out at Sunrise Highway, and immediately converted it to black and white. I just like the whole rolling hills here. It was a little dark. This kind of treatment has its own appeal to me. I just started playing around with trying to accentuate certain shadows, bring in a few little highlights, but really there's a ridge line here that we cannot see, or at least not see very well. Obviously there's these mid-ground ridges, and just started to explore the radial tools, the graduated filter tools, to coax some of that detail out. I thought I'd run down a few things that I did here, and I'm almost finished with the image. I've kind of reached a stage where I haven't decided at the very end, but I'll show you that in a second here. But first is turning off all of my filters that I've added. Let me turn those on, and so we'll see things change. And so now I'm coaxing some of these ridge lines out here and here. The mid-ground is a little bit more defined, so you can see a sampling of what's going on. Here's the radial filters, and I've got a bunch of them all around. Let me just pick on this one here, and I'll hover there for a minute. You can see I'm covering a large area, but because it's so underexposed, it's doing a full one-stop exposure increase, but leveraging the luminosity masks. If I show that luminance mask, I'm going to see it's not really affecting everything, but it is brightening things up quite a bit, right? That full stop there. So seeing just the hint of that ridge line, I kind of did the same thing over here. In the mid-ground, it was more toward, the mid-tone, so you can see the same. Let me just hover there for a second. That same notion of targeting certain tones, certain shadows, leveraging the luminance mask, and in this case, deciding to darken things a little bit, as well as add a bit of clarity that helped to really push the delta between the bright and the dark. So like in this case in here, this brightness, relative brightness behind these hills versus this foreground. Just let me bring that hill out a little bit more. I'll hover there one more time so you can see that type of mask that's there. And then let's go back to before these radials and graduateds and after. Just starting to bring forward more of the detail that's there. It's still a very dark, shadowy photo, but there's just more nuance, more layers. Went on further and did some additional refinement of the shadows, and this was really with the curves. And you'll see these things brighten up here a fair amount. And this is kind of where I'm not fully sold if I like this treatment or like the really dark treatment. Beautiful thing is I've got virtual copies or versions, and I can do whatever I like there to bring that out here. But definitely did some work on this side of the photo as well. Let me turn off those little pins. But it was really the mid-ground bringing things, much brighter. And that curve that's here, this doesn't look like much of a curve because this is such a shadowy image. There's a lot of things going on here. There's a tiny bit of reduction in the very, very deep shadows, and a moderate amount of increase in the low shadows. But if I hover over these areas, like this misty area here, but look how low that is on the curve. Watch the curve. You see my point moving around there? And then when I get into the hill itself, again, look over at the curve. There is not much of a difference in the tonal areas and on the full curve from pure black to pure white. But just nudging those things, this one is a little bit down, this one's a little bit up, and that adds a lot going on here, right? Just a lot of change that happens. So again, I'm not fully sold on it. I may want to tug down. Let's try it right now. I'm going to hold the shift key down so I just do things vertically, and I'm just rocking my finger back and forth on the trackpad to just lower things a little bit. And actually, maybe that treatment right there is a little bit better. So before I lose that, let me grab another snapshot, and we'll call that an alternate curve, because as I move through the next snapshots, I'm going to lose that adjustment if I don't save that. So moving, we were here, shadow refinement. Now one other thing I did to this photo that I almost never do is add grain. So added some grain. I actually had to go digging around a little bit. I'd forgotten that grain is down under the effects area, and just added a bit of grain in here. Because the photo it was taken, at a very, very dark time. There was already some noise in here, so I had amped up the noise reduction. Decided just to add a little bit of grain, give it a kind of an old film feel to it. Now is kind of the last thing I experimented with, and this one I'm really not quite sold on yet, is a split tone. After looking at this and seeing some of the color photos I'd taken later in the morning, it's like, wow, it was a really nice, beautiful, colorful morning. Do I want to reintroduce some color into this scene with just a subtle split tone? I'm torn. I like the black and white treatment, although when I look at it compared to the split tone, this has a slightly bluish cast to it, and I could compensate for that. I could do something with curves to really pull that back and make that much more of a purer gray. It's more like a blue-gray right now, or the split tone. And man, as I go back and forth, I'm gravitating back toward the pure black and white again. And, well, now I have to go and tinker and play. I just haven't finished working on this photo, but did enough with the shadow exploration. Wanted to cut a quick video, share that with you, and hopefully it gives you some ideas for your photos. If you have dark photos, silhouetted photos, play around with radial filters, with graduated filters, with the curves control, and focusing your changes in a very narrow area of tones. I'll show that curves one more time, where there is a whole lot going on in the low midtones to pure shadows, and tiny nudges on the curves. It's only in this area I'm making adjustments, and this is kind of just happening as a result of whatever adjustments I make here. Those can have big impacts when you have a photo with a narrow tonal range. So play around with it, have fun with it. Don't be afraid to experiment like I'm doing here. And if you got questions, go ahead and drop them below. Hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, my name's Scott Davenport. Have fun.